The rain poured relentlessly that night, drumming against the massive glass windows of the Kingston estate. Inside the grand mansion, hidden behind walls of wealth and power, a secret was unfolding, one that would shake the lives of everyone involved. Sophia had always known her place in this house. She was just a maid, nothing more, nothing less. But that didn't stop her heart from pounding every time she crossed paths with Alexander Kingston, the billionaire who owned not just this mansion, but empires beyond imagination. He was cold, calculating, and dangerously charming. His presence filled every room. His voice carried authority, and his eyes held a darkness that no one dared to question. But one mistake, one night, changed everything. Sophia had never intended for it to happen. It was a moment of vulnerability, a mistake she knew could never be undone. She had trusted him, believed in the kindness he had shown her in fleeting moments, only to realize too late that men like him didn't love women like her. When she told him she was pregnant, expecting maybe a sliver of compassion, his reaction was swift and cruel. "You think this child means anything to me?" Alexander's voice was ice, his piercing blue eyes filled with something far from kindness. "You were a mistake, Sophia, and so is this." His words sliced through her, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. That very night, she was thrown out of the Kingston estate with nothing but the clothes on her back and the life growing inside her. The rain mixed with her tears as she stood outside the gates, shivering, abandoned, and heartbroken. The man she had once foolishly admired had discarded her like she was nothing, but she wasn't nothing. Years passed, and the world moved on. The Kingston name remained untarnished, and Alexander lived his life as if Sophia had never existed. He married a woman of his status, built his empire even stronger, and continued being the ruthless businessman the world respected. If he ever thought about Sophia, he never showed it. But time has a way of unraveling secrets, and 5 years later, the secret he tried to erase was about to come knocking on his door. This time, impossible to ignore. No one could have predicted what happened next. When Sophia returned, she wasn't the helpless girl who had been thrown away, and the child Alexander had refused to acknowledge. He was no ordinary child, and soon, everyone would be shocked to learn the truth. The Kingston Empire had seen its fair share of storms, but nothing had ever threatened it quite like what was about to happen. Alexander Kingston had long buried the memory of Sophia. To him, she was a mistake, an unfortunate slip in judgment that had been swiftly dealt with. He had moved on, built his legacy, and ensured that nothing from his past could ever come back to haunt him. But fate had other plans. On a quiet evening, as the city lights shimmered in the distance, Alexander was seated in his high-rise office, going over reports, his mind occupied with numbers and business deals. The world knew him as a man of power, untouchable and ruthless. But at that moment, he felt something he hadn't in years, a strange unease creeping up his spine. Then his phone buzzed. "Sir, there's a woman here to see you." His secretary's voice came through. "I don't take unannounced visitors," he replied, uninterested. "She insists you'll want to hear what she has to say. And she has a child with her." Something inside him tightened. He hadn't heard those words in years. Yet the past came rushing back so fast, it almost made him dizzy. He hesitated, then sighed. "Send her in." The moment the office door opened, he felt the air shift. And when he saw her, standing tall, stronger than he remembered, with a quiet fire in her eyes, he knew the past was no longer buried. Sophia stepped inside, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She wasn't the scared girl he had thrown out all those years ago. She carried herself with confidence, her chin high, her gaze unwavering. But it wasn't just her presence that sent a chill down Alexander's spine. It was the boy beside her. The child stood still, staring up at him with a piercing gaze. And in that moment, Alexander saw it. The resemblance he couldn't deny. The boy's sharp jawline. His eyes that mirrored his own. The way he stood with quiet strength. There was no question. This was his son. For the first time in years, Alexander felt powerless. Sophia didn't waste time. You never wanted to acknowledge him. You never even asked about him, she said, her voice calm but firm. But he exists. And now you'll have to face that. Alexander clenched his jaw. He wasn't a man who let emotions control him, but something about this situation made his carefully built walls shake. What do you want, Sophia? Her lips curled slightly, but there was no amusement in her expression. Nothing from you. I've raised him alone, and he's doing just fine without you. But you don't get to erase what you did. Not anymore. He studied her, trying to understand what her endgame was. Sophia had always been kind, soft-hearted, but the woman standing before him now was different. There was steel in her. The boy, silent all this time, finally spoke. His voice was steady, holding no fear. Are you my father? The words cut deeper than Alexander expected. He had built a life of control, ensuring that no one had the power to shake him. And yet, in this moment, a 5-year-old boy had managed to do what no rival, no enemy, had ever done. For the first time in his life, Alexander Kingston had no answer. The tension in the room was suffocating. Sophia could see it in his eyes. The war going on inside him. But she didn't come here for his approval. She had come to show him that no matter how powerful he thought he was, he couldn't erase the past. Alexander finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. Why now? Sophia sighed, looking at her son, before turning back to Alexander. Because he deserves to know where he came from, and because I want you to see what you threw away. She turned to leave, but before she reached the door, Alexander said something she didn't expect. Wait, she paused, waiting, but didn't turn around. I want to meet him. Properly. Sophia closed her eyes briefly. She had spent years preparing for this moment, but nothing could have truly prepared her for the emotions it stirred. Slowly, she turned back around, her expression unreadable. This isn't about you, Alexander, she said. It's about him. And if you hurt him the way you hurt me, I swear you'll regret it. Alexander held her gaze, but he didn't argue, because for the first time, he realized that he had made a mistake, one he might never be able to fix, but he was about to try, and neither of them was ready for what would come next. Sophia wasn't sure if she should believe him. She had spent 5 years protecting her son from the man who had once thrown them both away, and now, with just one word, wait! Alexander wanted a chance to undo the past. It wasn't that simple. But then she looked down at her son, Daniel, had always been a quiet child, thoughtful beyond his years. He had never asked about his father before, but the way he stood there, staring at Alexander, she knew he had questions, and as much as she wanted to shield him, she couldn't deny him the truth. After a long pause, she nodded. Fine, you can meet him, but on my terms. Alexander exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath. Name them. Sophia crossed her arms. No lies, no empty promises. If you're here, you're in it for real. Otherwise, we walk away. For a man who controlled billion-dollar deals with ease, this seemed to be the one negotiation he struggled with. But he nodded. Understood. What started as an awkward first meeting quickly became something none of them had expected. Alexander was a stranger to fatherhood, but something about Daniel pulled him in. The boy was intelligent, sharp, and observant. So much like him, yet nothing like him at all. He didn't seek approval the way people usually did around Alexander. He asked hard questions, waited for real answers, and when he smiled, it was purely his own. At first, Sophia had watched their interactions with caution, waiting for the moment Alexander would prove her fears right. But something strange happened. He didn't push Daniel away. He listened. He showed up. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the walls between them began to crack. But just as Sophia started to believe that maybe, just maybe, Alexander had changed, reality hit hard. One evening, as she was closing up her small cafe, the one she had built from nothing, she found a familiar figure waiting for her outside. It was Victoria Kingston, Alexander's wife. Sophia's heart tightened. "I thought you'd come sooner," she said, keeping her voice steady. Victoria tilted her head, studying her. She was beautiful, polished, every bit the billionaire's wife. But her eyes held something else. "I'm not here to threaten you," Victoria said. "I just want to understand." "Why now?" Sophia sighed. "I didn't come back for him. I came back for my son. He deserves to know who he is." Victoria nodded slowly, as if weighing her words. "And what about Alexander? Do you still love him?" Sophia's breath caught, but she recovered quickly. "Love? No. That man broke me once. I won't let him do it again." Victoria studied her for a long moment before finally speaking. "Then don't let him disappoint that boy the way he disappointed you." With that, she walked away, leaving Sophia standing in the cold. Sophia knew Victoria was right. The past had proven that Alexander only did what benefited him. But what scared her most was that this time she wasn't sure. If that was still true, the real test came a week later. Alexander had invited Daniel to an event, a charity gala, the kind of thing the Kingston family was known for. Sophia had been hesitant, but Daniel wanted to go, and she didn't want to be the one to take that away from him. Dressed in a small tuxedo, Daniel looked up at his mother before leaving. "Do you think he's proud of me?" Sophia's chest tightened. "Of course, baby. But what matters most is that you're proud of yourself." Daniel nodded, holding her words close. That night, the event was glittering with the city's elite. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, and in the middle of it all was Alexander, with Daniel standing beside him. It was the first time the world saw them together. Then the question came. A reporter, sensing a scandal, asked, "Mr. Kingston, is this your son?" The room fell silent. Sophia, watching from home, felt her breath hitch. This was the moment she had feared the most. And then, Alexander did something no one expected. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder, and without hesitation said, "Yes, he is my son." Gasps filled the room. Headlines were being written in real time. But none of that mattered, because in that instant, Sophia saw something real in Alexander's eyes. It wasn't about power, or reputation, or control. It was about the boy standing beside him, and for the first time in his life, Alexander Kingston chose something over his empire. When Daniel returned home, he ran into Sophia's arms, excitement in his voice. "He told everyone, Mom." "He didn't." "Hide me." Sophia held him tightly, emotions overwhelming her. She had spent so many years expecting the worst. But maybe, just maybe, people could change. A few days later, Alexander came to see her. Standing in the doorway of her cafe, he looked almost uncertain. "I meant what I said," he told her. "He's my son, and I want to be in his life. For real." Sophia searched his face for any sign of dishonesty, but for once, she found none. She exhaled. "Then prove it. Not to me, to him." Alexander nodded. as if he already knew that was the only answer she would give. There was no fairy tale ending, no perfect resolution, but there was something even more powerful: hope, and sometimes that was enough.